What is up, Filmalytics family? Welcome into the first ever DFS show. I am your host, Chad Workman. You know me as the host of the Dynasty Redraft podcast. I am here to bring you a new Filmalytics DFS show. We'll be coming at you weekly every Friday, previewing the upcoming slate. Want to tell you about my DFS model, kind of what we got going on here with DFS, and give you a few plays for the slate this weekend. So, like I said, this show will be coming every Friday, once a week, a little 15 to 20-minute video / podcast. First, I want to tell you a little bit about my DFS model that will be coming. It's not live yet because we only have 1 week of data. Should be out next week, 2 weeks of data. I prefer to have more than that, but basically, it's going to be a combination, and I used this last year. I made a little bit of money on it playing DFS, so I thought I would take it live here for you guys. But I want to tell you a little bit about it and explain it first. It's going to take a few things into account. First of all, if you go out on the market and search for DFS tools, you're going to find lineup optimizers. Those are primarily for people who are playing in a bunch of big tournaments, entering, submitting 40, 50, 60 lineups. Just don't have time to build them all. So they'll go in and utilize these lineup optimizers. That's great, but it does a lot of the work for you, right? And if you're only playing in submitting a few lineups per week, it's probably not worth it for you. The other thing you're going to find is just projections. Projections are great. I don't have anything against projections, but they're very, very tough. Also, many of them are based on season-long totals. So previewing or giving a prediction for that week is often based on what they need to keep pace for their season-long projections. Of course, there's matchups factored in and things like that. So projections are great, but we need more than that. So where my model comes in, it kind of slides in between the two, in between projections and a lineup optimizer. It's not going to optimize a lineup for you. I'll tell you that right now. It's a tool to help you build the best lineup possible, but you do have to build your lineup. So what it does is it takes basically performance, just points scored, fantasy points. It takes that into account. It also takes salary into account. One big factor that I utilize is expected fantasy points as well as the points scored. And these are weighted kind of in different ways as well. But what expected fantasy points does is it tells us if a guy is overperforming a few weeks in a row. A guy has a couple big weeks. Think like Robbie Anderson last week. Um, I liked Robbie Anderson coming into the year. I'm not saying I don't, but he had a 75-yard touchdown. Take DeAndre Swift, for example. He far outperformed his expected fantasy points, where Jamal Williams actually had more expected fantasy points. So what that does is it tells us, what kind of usage guys are getting and what we can expect. So a guy might be priced too high because he's had a few big plays, but based on his expected fantasy points, he's probably not going to keep that up versus, a guy who maybe just missed a few big plays or got stuffed around the goal line a couple times, but we know, hey, his expected fantasy points are much higher. So that's going to help us kind of predict those and figure out who's priced incorrectly, basically. It's also going to factor in the matchup. I have a rating system, so rating the matchups. So obviously that's a huge part of DFS, right? And then it's also going to factor in the game totals and implied team point totals. So you want the guys that are going to be in a shootout type of environment, playing, putting up a lot of points, continuing to throw the ball around, things like that. So we want guys that are on a team with a higher implied point total, right? Naturally. So it takes all of these things into account, and it's basically weighted in certain ways that helps us paint a picture. Basically, it spits out values. Now, those values, I want to be clear, are based on they're not, they don't factor in correlation, for example. So, if y- Higgins projects really well. Maybe Chase does or doesn't, but it, you know, it's not going to link them together or link with Burrow or, for example, whomever they're playing against. It's not going to rank correlation and who's going to be a comeback option. You're going to need to do that stuff yourself. So it's just going to spit out a clean value. Now, this again is based on salary, matchup, all of those things. So you might see a player really expensive, but hey, he's been crushing it. He's still worth more. So he's up on the value list. You might see a guy that's a little cheaper ranked right up there with him because hey, he's way underpriced. So this value is it's there, right? But it is weighted in a sense where generally, the guys who are higher production players are going to be higher in it. So it's not like you're going to have number 4 receiver on a team who has a few big games right up there with the top guys just because he's cheap he's priced so cheap. That's not the way it works. So you will have basically the top performers, but they will be based on value. So it'll be a numbering system, and it'll be posted on our Patreon, Filmalytics, patreon.com/Filmalytics. So check us out there and subscribe, and you can have access to the weekly DFS model. It will be posted, updated weekly. Generally, we'll look back further than 2 weeks, but that's the data we'll have heading into week 3. So it'll be a large sample size as well. So it's not just an overreaction to 1 week, basically. So that's what you can expect from the DFS model. In terms of this week, there's a few games I like. I think the obvious one is the Cardinals and Raiders. They have the highest over under at 51.5. Little tidbit: Vegas played 9 home games last season at Allegiant Stadium. 5 of those reached 55 points or more. Something about Vegas, right? People just go nuts. So scoring is traditionally high in this dome, and we saw what Devontae Adams did last week. He and Derek Carr have a great connection. The Cardinals didn't look great, but we know what they're capable of on offense. So this is a pretty good matchup to target. I'm just going to gloss over a few matchups before giving you a few players. The Buccaneers at the Saints. I think this is a really great matchup to target. Uh, the over-unders 44, so pretty strong. Saints are implied total of 21, the Buccaneers 23.5, so both pretty strong. The Saints are coming off a 27-point outing. The Bucs scored just 19 last week, but it was a weird game in Dallas. Dallas wasn't doing much. It kind of, the pace of the game was a little bit different than I think what we can expect on Sunday. Now, Chris Godwin is unlikely to play. I think he might have even been ruled out at this point. Probably, by the time you hear this, he might be. But I really like. Well, first of all, Tom Brady is priced at 6,400. That's a pretty good price. Mike Evans, his top target is priced at 6,800, but Evans has averaged 30 yards less against Marshawn Lattimore and the Saints than he has all other opponents. Marshawn Lattimore uh, plays really well against Mike Evans. They kind of have a little bit of a rivalry, and I'm okay fading Evans this week. Uh, Julio Jones is affordable at 5,500, and Russell Gage is at 4,800. Now, he's questionable as well. I think he's trending towards playing. Uh, he didn't play a whole lot last week, but of course, with Godwin out, it's going to look a little bit different, especially if Evans is kind of being blanketed by Lattimore. I could see Julio and Russell Gage really getting in on the action. So really like them. Also, I think the Saints are a good team to stack. Obviously, you want to bring somebody back if you are stacking the Bucks, but even if you want to play Jameis at 5,500, I think that's okay. I'd rather play Brady in this game, but I like Michael Thomas at 5,800. He got 2 touchdowns last week. His price salary is a little weird because he's been out for so long, just came back, scored 2 touchdowns. So I don't think his price is quite accurate at this point. Jarvis Landry, just 5,000 salary. He had 114 yards last week and looked really good, really comfortable with Jameis in that offense. I like him a lot this week. Juwan Johnson at tight end is one of my favorite plays of the week. He had 5 targets last week. He just had 2 catches and 43 yards, so fairly quiet, but he ran excuse me. He ran a decent amount of routes last week. Let me find it. He ran 27 routes, 12th most among tight ends. He had 21 snaps in the slot, target share of 15.6%, which is ninth among all tight ends, number 5 in air yards among tight ends, number 1 in ADOT at 14.2. He had, I think, 5 or 6 red zone targets, which was tied for the most among all tight ends. So his usage was up there. I really like him as a player. I was on him last year. He never really turned that corner. He didn't really get consistent usage, but it seems like he's the guy now. So I think we can get in front of it with him. I think his price is going to start going up, and I think we can get in front of that one. So I really like him. The other game I'm looking at is the Commanders and Lions. I had the Eagles and Lions as a shootout last week, and that's what it turned into. The Commanders, I mean, their offense was kind of cooking last week. I mean, Wentz seems to do this. When he gets on a new team, he looks good for a couple of weeks, and then it starts to falter. He did have the 2 turnovers, but he threw for 313 yards and 4 touchdowns. You know, I think he's kind of a gunslinger, right? He's going to throw it around. So he's one of my favorite values at 5,800. I like Curtis Samuel, 4,600. That's a pretty good price for him. Jahan Dotson, I had him last week and he scored 2 touchdowns. All of these guys really are playable. But I like Wentz and Samuel the most. Even Logan Thomas is a pretty cheap option for a tight end. And then the Lions, I'm okay playing Swift. I think he's what is he priced at? 7,000. So he's up a couple hundred from last week, which is fine. But again, as I referenced earlier, he was RB28 in expected points. He only saw 3 targets, and that was in kind of a shootout type of game. So that worries me a little bit. Jamal Williams continues to be a good value at 5,400. He's getting the goal line work. He also saw a couple targets. I was on DJ Shark last week. He's 5,100 this week. Like him again. TJ Hawkinson at 4,700. Even Amon-Ra at 6,500 is a decent value. So I really like that game. Even Jared Goff can be played 5,400, but I do prefer Carson Wentz at 5,800. The last game is the Broncos at the Texans. Texans are only projected for 18 points. The Broncos 28. The reason I'm kind of throwing this game in the mix is because, for one, the Broncos have a high implied team total at 28. I think the team wants to get Russ in a groove. It was a little choppy last week, but he still threw for 340 yards and a touchdown. I think they want to get him comfortable, especially at home against a team like the Texans. No disrespect to the Texans, but for the Broncos, it's a team that they should beat. I think you're going to see Russ really get going and try to keep the foot on the gas to really just get comfortable and get in a groove. You know, I like Russ a bit. He's 7,200. Really like Cortland Sutton at 6,100. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy had a big week last week. And I like Jeudy too, but he was a little reliant on the big play that he had. I think Sutton is still the number one here. I think Albert O is a great value. KJ Hamler's out this week. Albert O, I think there's kind of a misconception after week 1 because they were using multiple tight ends at the beginning of the game. but those were scripted plays. We didn't see much of the other tight ends the rest of the way. Alberto was the one running, I think ran like 80 some percent of the tight end routes, like 87% of the tight end routes. So 3,700, I really like him as a value. I don't mind playing Javonte 6,500. Typically, I'm not going to stack Javonte with say Russ and Sutton or Alberto. But if you don't want to stack that, I'm okay playing Javonte because he had 12 targets last week, and if that keeps up, you know, he's going to have a really big year. And maybe they, get a lead and run the ball a bit, but I think they're going to keep the foot on the gas and keep throwing the ball. So Javonte might see double-digit targets again. And as far as a bring back option, Brandon Cooks is the obvious play at 6,000. He saw 12 targets last week. He's going to continue to be a target monster in this offense, but Patrick Surtain's going to be on him. Pat Surtain is quickly becoming one of the better corners in the league, so that's a little concerning for me. I don't mind going contrarian with Nico Collins at 4,100. Really like his talent. He didn't get that involved last week, but I think we're going to see him start to build some momentum as the second option in this passing offense. So I'm playing Nico Collins this week at 4,100. OJ Howard, 3,000. You can play him, but he got 2 touchdowns last week, and that was it. There's other guys I like at that price point. I'm not really in on OJ Howard, but you need, if you're betting on Russ and a pass catcher, you probably need a comeback option there from the Texans. If you're playing in a bigger tournament, especially. Just a few other names I'm going to throw out there. Also, this one is another potential bring back option for Broncos Texans. I know it's ugly, but that's Rex Burkhead at 4,900. He's their passing down back. He is getting carries as well. Last week, he had 14 carries, just 40 yards. He had 8 targets, caught 5 for 30. And the Broncos aren't great against pass catching running backs. I could see the Texans trailing and getting, heaving it out there 40 plus times, in which case Rex Burkhead is going to be a part of that. So I think at 4,900, he's a pretty good value. I think Christian Kirk's a good value at 5,700. He had 117 yards last week. Jaguars and Colts is another sneaky game that could kind of turn into a little bit of a shootout. Trevor Lawrence has been having some accuracy issues. I think eventually he's going to have that breakout game. It could be this week against the Colts. So I like Kirk just kind of as a standalone play. Going back to the Raiders, I think Darren Waller is a good value, 5,600. I was one of the few people that liked him coming into the year, even with Devontae Adams. I think people kind of that shied them away from Waller, but as I said then, this passing offense is going to be so concentrated. It's going to be Adams, Waller, Renfro, and then just some spare parts. And that's what we saw. Adams, 17 targets last week, but Waller had 6, Renfro had 6. After that, Brandon Bolden 2, Matt Collins 1, Jacobs, Johnson, Abdullah each had 1. So it's those 3 guys. So I really like Waller at 5,600. You could even play Renfro at 5,500, but I think I prefer the Waller play. Adams is 8,600, and I think he's worth it this week. So that's what I'm looking at for week 2. Beginning next week, we will have the DFS model live. I will kind of review it and talk about some of the best values and how to correlate them and kind of do what I did this week in terms of the games that I like. But I look forward to bringing you the DFS model for this week. Hit me up on Twitter at Tweets by Chad. Tell me, how your DFS stacks played out. Follow us on Twitter at Filmalytics_. Website filmalytics.org. And of course, head on over to the Patreon at patreon.com/Filmalytics. We will see you next week.